Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, the next speaker is Mr. Kobus van Zyl from Omnia. So we opened the floor a bit and we were not that prescriptive when we asked him to present at the symposium. So this is going to be a surprise, and he promised to surprise us. Kobus, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. From the fields, I hope today you will experience a bit of farm inside of this venue. So to start off, I would also like to thank some of my colleagues that helped me with some information and share some of the information with me. I think if you look at sunflowers, farmers plant sunflowers if they can't plant maize or if they can't plant soybeans. It's normally late or sometimes very early. The past few seasons were difficult seasons, wet, too much rain, sometimes followed with dry spells, so it was difficult conditions on farm. But I think through all of those challenges, we've learned some things, and I'm going to share some of those thoughts with you today. So just quickly to have a look at what we're going to discuss today. If we look at the world record for sunflowers, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with that, but if we're going to look at that, just keep in mind, and if I look at the oil content, it looks to me as if they're farming on oil, if I look at the oil content that they produce on those fields. It seems like the sunflowers is taking up the oil and ending up in the seeds. So it's quite astonishing if you compare the yield with the oil content. So we're going to have a look at that. We're going to have a look at general production practices. General production practices, what happens on farm. So it's going to be very simple. But just to maybe give everybody in the audience a bit broader understanding of what happens on farm. So there we will look at tillage, we will look at planting depth, we will look at fertilizer, since I'm from a fertilizer company, that's what we specialize in. So I'm gonna spend quite a while on that. I'm not gonna take some of Andre's space, but I would like to share some thoughts there. I'm going to share a little bit on crop protection, just so that you can see what the farmers are up to and what they need to control. And then also a bit on crop monitoring or crop growth monitoring to see what happens in season, how can we adjust, what can we do to optimize yield. And then just a brief short summary. So if we look at the world record, and if somebody has got newer information, that's the information that I've got, set up in 2016 in Russia. And on dry land, that's quite high, 6.2 tons. How many of you guys have ever experienced more than 5 tons in South Africa? Is there any guys, by means of hands, experienced more than 5 tons in South Africa? Anyone? 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 Only me. If you don't believe me, that's fine. I've seen 6 tons. I've seen 6 tons on dry land. So I phoned the farmer and said, stop, we need to check, we need to see what happened there. Why? How is it possible? Is it double seeding? Is it double fertilizing? Is it just if we can call it in Afrikaans, luck shot or pox, soos wat we sê. What happened? So we stopped and we checked, and everything was 100% perfect. The land was prepared for mealies, and he ended up planting sunflowers. So he pre-planted fertilizer for mealies, planted sunflower, and it responded extremely well. It's just a little part of the land, it's not average. It's not average, just a little part of the land. So yes, 6 tons is a bit far-fetched, I don't know the hectares of this. And there you can see the moisture, you can see the The oil content, extremely high, extremely high. If we can get to oil content of 48 in South Africa, I think that will be a major, major step up. Difficult, but I believe not impossible. If we see all of this data, we can ask ourselves the questions, is sunflower still a marginal crop? I believe it's marginal because of how we treat the crop, not because of the crop itself. If we look at some of the production practices then on farm, if we look at tillage, we've got the primary tillage where we do the deep cultivation to make sure that the plant roots get enough water. We do the seed bed preparation. We sometimes do wind control on the sandier soils. We have to. That's also something that keep in mind. If you plant sunflower on sandier soils, the stubble for the next season is not as good as maize stubble. So you have a challenge controlling wind the next season. And then also to control weed, we're fortunate today, or the past few years, to have different methods of weed control on sunflower that also broadened the spectrum to control broadleaves. So I think that also made a big step up and played a very big role, contribution to getting the fields cleaner and get rid of the difficult to control broadleaves in sunflower. So we know that sunflowers, for good germination, wants a very firm seed bed, not compacted, but a firm seed bed. And that should be established either by cultivation or by waiting for a good shower of rain for natural compaction to get a firm seed bed. And if you get it all right, you get a nice stand. We all know that stand is extremely important for yield. So if you've got stand, you've got one of the boxes ticked for having a good yield. So this is what happens if you cultivate in wet soils and you plant sunflowers. You end up with compaction. You can see that roots is really not happy, doesn't grow well. What happens when the wind blows? The plants fall over. Difficult to explain and difficult to get to the end of the problem, but in this specific example that I'm showing you, almost 90% of the field was lying down. So difficult to harvest. The farmer have to send in labor to cut the heads or the sunflower heads. So very difficult, and this condition, if you look at that, especially tillage, is extremely important to make sure that you get enough moisture from the soil. And if you look at this example, you only had about 10, 15 centimeters of soil available for the plant to use some moisture. We know sunflowers are very, very, if you look at moisture uptake, very good with moisture uptake. So, yeah, and if you compare it to maize, it uses a bit more water to produce 1 ton of seeds, but it's very, very good, especially in drier soils and a bit shallower soils. Very good if you control it with your amount of plants per hectare. So if you look at planting depth, it's also very, very important. Some farmers plant too shallow, some farmers plant too deep, and on the end that's got an influence of the amount of final amounts of plants per hectare that is established. Sandier soils is a challenge because it dries off much quicker, so we tend to plant a bit deeper, and then we use the rotary hoe 3 days after planting to make sure that the plants, we've got enough plants that are on the field to produce a good yield. So a bit more to what I'm more comfortable with fertilizer. I think it's also, if you look at managing soil fertility, you need to have good phosphate levels, you need to have good K levels. It's not different from maize, it's not different from soybeans. You need to have a very good basis when you start. You need to fertilize properly, but you also need to use what's available in the soil as good as possible. Yield potential, the driver for yield potential will be the yield potential will be driven by the amount of fertilizers you apply. So that should be discussed early to see if you've got a realistic yield potential in mind. You can't fertilize for 6 tons if you're not sure you're going to get 6 tons. So you need the fertilizer for yields that's easy or easier to get. So by saying that, I think if one look at sunflowers and you look at fertility in sunflowers or fertilizer in sunflowers, what I see in field, the farmers that fertilize their sunflowers the same than they fertilize the maize with a bit less nitrogen is the ones that are getting the highest yields, and yield stability is also the best on their farms. It's not, if you look at having yields of 3.5 tons farm average, that's good yields, extremely good yields. Happened quite a while ago, past 3-4 years, as I said previously, difficult growing seasons, high disease, too much rain. So it's difficult growing conditions, and we didn't see those high yields. This year, fortunately, we're seeing good yields again. So hopefully we will learn something from the past and also from what we've seen this specific season. Placement of fertilizer can cause a lot of problem, and I'll speak a bit more on that further. Soil acidity is extremely important to look at and to maintain at a pH level of about 5.5, as also with other crops. So if you don't fertilize, you will not have zero yield, but it will cause quite a yield lag. And there you can see just a planter not applying fertilizer, starter fertilizer, what drastic impact that has on just normal plant growth. And that's what happens if you place your fertilizer too close. You get seed burn, extremely sensitive for high salt. So the placement of the fertilizer is very, very important. The amount and where you put it in the field. And if you do it right, you get sunflowers like that. There's lots of things one can do to make differences in sunflower yield. This is one of them. If you look at putting down a root stimulant at planting, this is not a foliar, it's in furrow application. That's the kind of reaction that we see. It's just a demonstration, visual demonstration of the picture. And you can see quite a big difference in root growth. And you get an ROI of about more than 300%, that I believe extremely good. So yes, that's what we've been seeing in the field on lots of trials, not 1 or 2 trials, but lots of trials. And now I'm going to discuss a bit more on phosphates and potassium. Looking at them, you'll see, looking at this first graph, you'll see the P applications, and you'll see soil levels of 10 to 15, quite low, and soil potassium levels of 60 to 80. You'll see the reaction. This was a reaction on top of normal planter mixture being applied. So this phosphates were applied additionally, 5P, 10P, and then the K also applied additionally, 0, 12.5, and 25K applied additionally. Here you will see a drop in yield, if you look at this one, with 5P extra, and then a bit of gain of 10P extra, 0P almost similar to that one, and then K had no influence. That's if you look only to the element on its own. But if you look at the interaction, you'll see quite a different picture. You'll see here, if just looking at the high P, as you increase the P and increase the K, you get higher yields, if you look at that. So that was quite interesting, looking at that, and you'll see the yield levels are also quite high yields, varying between 2.4 and 3.2 tons. So quite good yields achieved on that. That showed to me, it's a trial that I've done, showed to me just don't look in isolation on any element. Look at the combined benefit of elements. Don't just look at nitrogen or just at P or just at K. Look at the combination and what you achieve from that. This specific trial is done also in Bothaville area. It's done with different nitrogen sources. And if you look at this trial, it's a combination of pre-plant top dress and different nitrogen sources. This is ammonium nitrate liquid. This is urea granules top dressed. This is a combination of urea and ammonium nitrate liquid form, and this is ammonia gas. This specific treatment, the ammonium nitrate, was applied at 9 kilograms less nitrogen just because of the calibration. We couldn't do the calibration differently. So you can see quite a good response. What I learned from this trial, I always thought, no, pre-plant fertilizer is better. But this trial showed me that top dress fertilizer is actually better. And if you look at top dress fertilizer, why would it be better? It's maybe because of the placement of the fertilizer, the timing of the rain, better uptake, lots of things to consider. But yeah, very interesting and learnful trial, this specific one. This specific one is just on-farm data that I'm going to show you. It's the difference between top dressing of nitrogen and not top dressing nitrogen. And this is a yield map. You'll see this little area here wasn't top dressed. That area above wasn't top dressed. This area was top dressed and this wasn't top dressed. So it showed quite a big increase in yield. It was a difficult season, lots of diseases, but very good increase in yield. And if one look at the ROI, also bigger than 400% on that specific trial. Foliar's price, some guys might think, no, this is devil dust, what do they call it? Slanggif. It's not always true. If you do the correct things at the right time, you get huge results. Just by showing you this trial with Foliar's price, extremely good yields, 3.1 tons on the specific treatment, and compared to doing nothing, extremely good result. This specific one, same, very, very good results, and the same treatment came on top, 2 different plots where we did this trial. So yes, some things to look at, and it's not always, you need to focus on what the plant needs, and if you do that, you normally get the reward. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this, boron deficiencies. It's quite similar, or happens quite often on sandy soils, but South Africa's soils are very, very low in boron, most of the soils. And we normally say if we get this kind of symptoms, we say no, it's boron deficiencies, but it might also be other fertility issues or fertilizer issues that can cause this specific symptom. So don't, again, look in isolation. Make sure that you've got the correct answer. Just crop protection, I'm just gonna say a few words on that. I think it's extremely important to make sure that herbicide carryover from the previous crop doesn't cause damage to your sunflower crop. I've seen that quite often. And what I also see is cross-contamination, farmers spraying fields with Roundup, and then the sprayer is not cleaned properly, it's carried over to the sunflowers or to some of the other crops, and that also causes damage. Always start clean. That's one golden rule. Always start clean. No weeds must be on the field. And then we also know that Clearfield or aerolighting has got a waiting period for the next crop. So if you plant sunflowers extremely late, it's very difficult to apply those herbicides because your waiting period for the next crop is quite a while. This is, if you look at this picture, this is nematode damage on the sunflower. And on sandy soils, you often get this, and it causes the plants to have poor water uptake, poor nutrient uptake, and they're also not that tolerant to drought stresses, so they are extremely important. And as far as I know, there's no products registered to use as nematode control on sunflower. I'm not 100% sure, but that's as far as I know. This is what happens if you don't check the field often. You might get bad damage with bollworm. And this is the one that we know causes lots of trouble. And I think that farmers shy away from sunflower. It's also causing big problems in yield stability. And if you had it in the field, rather don't plant sunflowers, and rather don't plant soybeans. Alternaria is also known as one of the foliar diseases that causes a lot of trouble. I'm not going to say a lot about that, but yes, we know it's one that what we must check often and make sure we don't get problems with that. Growth monitoring by using sap analysis, leaf analysis, or satellite imaging. Satellite imaging give us is a very, very nice tool that we can use to see what happens in season. Here you can see the growth pattern of sunflower in season. And then we also have a nice visualization of which areas are the better areas and which areas are the poorer areas. So it helps a lot to go and do scouting, see what's happening in different areas of the field. To summarize, stick to best practices. If I say best practices, speak to the farmers that are the sunflower kings, if I can call it that way. Speak to them about the practices. Make sure that you use the best available genetics, best disease control, best fertilizer, best in-season monitoring, and you might be amazed with the yield that you get. Preventing fire is better than fighting fire. I believe if you control diseases or control nematodes or any form of insect or disease that might have yield effect, it's much better than start to control it when you see it. So rather do it beforehand. Then I think important, treat sunflower as a main crop and don't see it as a marginal crop. If you treat it as a main crop, you'll see a huge difference. And that's what we see the farmers that's doing it properly. And then that might just end up in small changes with big rewards. Thank you.
Kobus, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. Definitely small changes and big rewards. Ladies and gentlemen, before we break for tea, I think we received a lot of information, valuable information, interesting information. And therefore, we decided to make the presentations available with the approval of the speakers. The proceedings or the symposium, we also recording that, and that will also be made available on the Oortpot OAC website. I think we can give the speakers another round of applause. Thank you. And with that, we break for tea. Can I please ask everybody to be back in the auditorium at 11:30.